December 2nd, 1943. Outskirts of Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. A thin veil of desert dust hung in the air as dawn broke over the North African hills. The battle had ended hours ago, and silence, broken only by the distant hum of Allied engines, settled across the ochre sands. A group of weary German soldiers, their gray uniforms streaked with oil and grit, stood under the watchful gaze of American MPs. Sergeant Karl Meinhardt shifted his weight, feeling the ache in his shoulder where shrapnel had found him 3 days earlier. He had fought through the chaos of Kasserine and watched with disbelief as American forces, once scattered, seemed to reappear in force overnight. Now, as he glanced toward a line of jeeps roaring over the ridge, dust plumes trailing behind them, Meinhardt frowned. Dozens of them, barely a 2-ton vehicle, open-bodied, bouncing easily across terrain that bogged down Panzer supply trucks. Their engines sang like a swarm of bees, 100 cylinders in perfect mechanical harmony. The Germans waited, trying to count them, but lost track before the convoy even crested the hill. "Unmöglich," muttered one of his comrades, a corporal who once worked in a steel plant outside Essen. "We take weeks just to get spare parts for one Panzer IV, and they have a motor pool the size of our regiment." An American lieutenant hopped down from the lead jeep, wearing a confident half-smile. "Morning, boys," he said, tipping his helmet. Behind him, 2 more jeeps peeled off toward the ridge, still another unloading supplies. Crates, fuel cans, even a typewriter, packed tight and ready for the next advance. Meinhardt stared at the stenciled word on one crate. Willys, Toledo, Ohio. He didn't know it yet, but that name, Willys, would stick in his memory for the rest of the war. Because the small, boxy vehicles surrounding him represented something the Wehrmacht could scarcely comprehend, an enemy that could build faster, move faster, and adapt faster than any in history. He turned to his comrades and muttered in disbelief. They must have thousands of these machines. Behind them, a mechanic knelt beside an American jeep, tightening bolts with effortless speed. The Germans noticed how simple the design was. No ornate panels, no unnecessary fittings, just a steel shape made to move and endure. The corporal from Essen crouched for a closer look through the barbed wire fence. "This isn't craftsmanship," he whispered, "it's multiplication." For a moment, the desert sun caught on the jeep's windshield, reflecting in Meinhardt's eyes. He could only shake his head. He had spent months waiting for spare parts that never came, watching tanks abandoned when gearboxes failed. Yet here was the enemy, turning broken vehicles into convoys again within a day. If tanks were kings on the battlefield, Meinhardt thought grimly, then these jeeps were the messengers of an empire that never slept. By the time the captured Germans reached the American supply depot outside Sidi Bouzid, they began to notice a pattern. Everywhere they looked, the same open-bodied vehicles zipped between tents and warehouses like worker ants. Some hauled ammunition, others ferried officers or wounded soldiers. One even had a mounted radio set in the back, its antenna swaying as the driver shouted coordinates into the dust. Sergeant Meinhardt couldn't stop staring. He had seen elegant German engineering up close, the crisp precision of a Tiger tank's transmission, the heavy elegance of a Luftwaffe bomb rack. But this was something else entirely. The Jeep was unrefined, but incorruptible. Its flat panels looked as if a child had drawn them with a ruler, yet each one fit perfectly. More importantly, it worked, again and again, without complaint. A young American corporal noticed his curiosity. "You like it?" he called out with a grin, giving the hood an affectionate knock. "Built in Toledo. You could drop one off a cliff, and she'd still run." He climbed in, twisted the ignition, and the engine came to life with a cough and a growl. "They say Detroit sends us one every minute," he added proudly. "By lunchtime, 1,000 more will be rolling." The Germans didn't believe him at first. One every minute? Impossible. Factories didn't work like that. They required handcrafted assembly, meticulous adjustments, the careful hands of skilled men. But the Americans seemed to have rewritten the laws of war and labor altogether. What Germany handcrafted, America stamped. A few days later, Meinhardt got his proof. From his fenced compound, he heard the thunder of train wheels at night. A new shipment of jeeps was arriving. Flat cars stacked 3 levels high, glinting shapes under the desert moon. Dozens of GIs worked through the darkness with floodlights, unloading, checking tires, filling them with fuel. By sunrise, the line of vehicles stretched beyond the hill's edge, rows upon rows, each identical to the last. He looked down at his uniform, still caked with engine grease from the broken half-track he'd abandoned before his capture. That machine had sat useless, awaiting a clutch plate that never came. His crew had spent weeks tearing it down, only for a single missing part to keep it dormant. Here, a single missing Jeep was replaced before anyone noticed it was gone. He turned to his comrade, who sat quietly smoking. "They don't repair their machines," Meinhardt said softly. "They replace them." The words carried no bitterness, only a strange awe. The Allies were winning not through genius tactics or unbreakable will, but through an ocean of relentless production. The Jeep was not just transportation. It was ideology in motion, standardized, simple, and unstoppable. Somewhere far across the Atlantic, in an American factory humming beneath fluorescent lights, a woman in overalls guided a fresh panel of steel into a press. Pistons hissed. Sparks flew. Another Jeep was born. Back in Tunisia, Meinhardt watched as one more olive-green shape rolled off the train, its motor already running. The soldier in him felt a pang of admiration and dread. Across the ocean from the dusty hills of Tunisia, the rhythmic thunder of machinery shook the ground in Toledo, Ohio. It was February 1943, and the sprawling Willys Overland plant ran around the clock. The factory floor was a blur of motion, an industrial battlefield in its own right. Cranes swung overhead, stamping presses pounded steel into form, and the air hummed with the scent of oil, ozone, and molten metal. Rows of women in blue coveralls and men with grease-streaked arms assembled Jeeps piece by piece. Axles, transmissions, fenders, engines, all designed to fit together with mathematical precision. No single worker saw the full vehicle, but together, they produced hundreds by the hour. Simple design was their greatest weapon, 2,500 parts that fit anywhere, anytime, in any unit from Alaska to North Africa. Inside the plant, Ethel Johnson, a forewoman in her mid-30s, leaned over the line to correct a new worker. "Don't torque it too tight," she said above the roar. "Needs to travel halfway around the world before someone even checks it again." She smiled faintly, wiping her forehead with the edge of her glove. No one here thought of fame or medals. Yet they were shaping the war every bit as surely as the soldiers who drove their creations. As each Jeep rolled toward final inspection, a foreman chalked a number on the hood and sent it toward the loading bay. Within hours, flatbed trucks carried them to rail yards where they vanished westward toward ships and convoys. The process never paused. Even during air raid drills or blackout warnings, backup generators kept the lines humming. The output was staggering, 1 Jeep per minute, every minute, 24 hours a day. At the center of it all, a huge banner hung from the rafters, the Willys MB, helping build victory. The words weren't just propaganda. Soldiers swore by these machines. They leapt over ditches, hauled artillery, carried stretchers, and even mounted recoilless rifles. One Marine raider once said, "If it broke, you fixed it with wire. If it drowned, you pulled it out." It always came back. Back in Africa, that same unbreakable spirit manifested as long columns of Jeeps darted through the desert, delivering fuel, food, and ammunition with surgical reliability. To the Germans, it appeared as though America had conjured a mechanized horde from thin air. In truth, the miracle wasn't the machines, it was the people behind them. From Ohio to Detroit to Buffalo, factories once making sedans and farm trucks had become engines of war. Assembly lines bent under the weight of urgency and invention. Blue-collar America had found its rhythm in repetition. Each nut tightened, each bolt driven forward was one more blow to fascism's war machine. Meanwhile, deep in German high command, intercepted intelligence began to surface. Reports described Allied vehicle movements increasing exponentially, hundreds of new transports per day in the Tunisian theater alone. General Albert Kesselring read the brief with a scowl. "A motor every minute," he muttered. "Then we are not fighting soldiers anymore. We are fighting factories." And he was right. April 10th, 1943. Near Mejaz el Bab, Tunisia, the rain had turned the ground into a greasy paste of mud and crushed grass. Sergeant Meinhardt and a dozen other German prisoners were marched past the edge of an American armored column. He moved slowly, his boots heavy, yet his gaze never left the convoy unfurling beside the road. Hundreds of vehicles stretching toward the horizon like a metal river. Half-tracks, Sherman tanks, artillery pulled on trailers. But again, it was the jeeps that stole his attention. They darted in and out of the ranks like restless animals, an infinite swarm. Mechanics crouched beside them, tuning engines, changing spark plugs in seconds. Drivers laughed as they passed, lighting cigarettes, the smell of gasoline and laughter mingling in the humid air. The entire army moved with the ease of a single machine, interconnected by those tiny four-wheeled lifelines. A column officer barked an order in English, and one jeep peeled off with a medic's cross stenciled on the side. In minutes, 2 wounded men were loaded up and whisked down the line. The scene struck Meinhardt deeply. He had seen German medics struggle for hours to move a single casualty through the muck, dragging stretchers behind half-dead mules. Yet here, the Americans turned chaos into choreography. That night, inside a makeshift holding tent, Meinhardt listened as one of his guards, a mechanic from Chicago, chatted with another soldier about the upcoming Italian campaign. "They're shipping 10,000 more of these down next month," said the guard, tapping the canvas wall with a smirk. "We'll roll from Sicily to Berlin before they can gas up their panzers." Meinhardt didn't argue. He simply nodded and thought of home, of his commander back in the fatherland waiting weeks for a replacement track sprocket. He remembered the bureaucratic madness of requisition forms, the shortages, the quiet despair of knowing your machine might never run again once it broke. Here, that problem didn't exist. The Americans had industrialized reliability itself. By morning, he watched yet another line of jeeps loaded with crates speed past the camp. The sun reflected off their flat hoods, dozens of tiny flashes across the landscape. They were everywhere, it seemed, multiplying like an idea that refused to die. When an American private offered him a tin cup of coffee through the barbed wire, Meinhardt took it. The young man smiled, motioned toward the jeeps revving in the distance, and said, "They'll be making those 20 years after this war's done." Meinhardt stared after them, a thought forming heavy in his chest. Perhaps Germany hadn't lost because its soldiers were weaker, or even because its tanks were fewer, but because the enemy had learned to build an army faster than time could destroy it. He turned the thought over in silence. The real victory, he realized, wasn't happening on the battlefield at all. It was happening in the factories, thousands of miles away, where hammers rang louder than artillery. As night fell over the North African plains, a wind rose and rattled the canvas above his head. The rumble of engines echoed faintly in the distance, rolling endlessly, as if the world itself had taken on the rhythm of production. Somewhere, another jeep was being built, and another, and another.